We're on page 60 in Friedlander's print. And in the paragraph print, with the English translation, we're just about at the end and almost finished with paragraph 72. We're at the end of paragraph 72. The original question is now going, the original question of several pages ago, which was on page 55, Nun Hey, and in the paragraphs was 71. The neshama said to the seichel, I have an understanding of the system inside creation. It's a system that the perfectly imperfect creation must be perfected. Adam Harishon had that opportunity to perfect the perfectly imperfect creation at the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, and he failed. And therefore, we're now working from behind the 8 ball, trying to perfect an even further imperfectly perfect creation, because besides the inherent, the Ramchal is going to discuss that later in the Sefer, besides the inherent imperfection in every human being, because he's born with Eitz Hadas Tov Ra infection in him, which he can't even get rid of during his lifetime. It has to leave his body during the decomposition in the grave. Even Adam Harishon had inherent imperfection, so that he can perfect it. And by perfecting it, he worked on himself. He made decisions. He can get Olam Haba based upon earning it, not free lollipops. Adam Harishon failed at that moment, and therefore man is now left with not only the imperfection of the Eitz Hadah, not only with the inherent imperfection that Adam was created with, for him to perfect. Now, every time a person does an Aveira Chas v'Sholom, he brings further imperfection into his life. So now he has 2 jobs. First, he has to clean up the inherent imperfection in the human being. Then he has to clean up the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, which Adam brought into his being, and all the other Aveiros that he's piled up on top of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. So while Adam Harishon had only one type of Ra to perfect, the inherent, quote, imperfection that he was created with to perfect himself, and he could have done that. By taking in the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra into his body, created a permanent infection until Tchias HaMesim. And now, every Aveira that a person piles up on the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, he's got to perfect that too. So every time a person does an Aveira, he further imperfects an already imperfect body, imperfect life, and he's adding more work. He's going to have more work to do. The more Aveiros Chas v'Sholom, the more work. You're just creating more work for yourself to do during your lifetime. So in this system, which is called the perfectly imperfect world that needs perfection, so on page Nun Hey 55 and paragraph 71, the Neshama had a question for the Seichel. Amar HaNeshama, Matzanu to'ela shleimus laguf. In this system, I see how a perfectly imperfect body can become perfected. And that's how this system works. Uzachus l'neshama. And I found that the neshama gets a merit, because the neshama is going to perfect the guf. So we have 2 things. The perfectly imperfect guf has become perfect. That's wonderful. That's a perfect thing in the perfectly imperfect system here. That's absolutely consistent with the system. The perfectly imperfect body is going to be perfected, because that's what the purpose of the system is. On the other hand, what is the neshama getting out of this? The neshama is getting a merit. It's going to get a reward. You did what? You perfected the body. Avol lo to'ela shleimus l'neshama. But what perfection does the neshama get out of this process? The neshama is part of the system too. There's a neshama in the system, there's a guf in the system, and the whole system is a perfectly imperfect system leading to perfection. So I got it. The guf is perfectly imperfect, that's going to get to perfection. The neshama is going to get reward for making the guf perfect, but what did happen to the guf? How did it perfect itself? So if you take a look on page 55, Nun Hey, Friedlander explained this question. In fact, the neshama gets tremendous merit, reward, because it purified the body. But please explain to me, what further perfection happens to the neshama in the system? For the system to work, you told me, inside the system we're dealing with perfections that need to be perfected. I understand that for the body, but how do you do that to the neshama? The neshama comes from the right below the kisei hakavod, whatever that means. Ushlei kara. The neshama is perfect. It's shleimus. Elakai neshama shenasata b'tahirahi. It's tar. It's perfect. What in the system of perfectly imperfect can we do for the neshama? That was the question. The Ramchal has given us a lot of ideas since then, and now he's going to answer the question on page 60, the end of paragraph 72. Haneshama atzma, this is the caption of Rav Friedlander. Haneshama atzma tis'aleh al yidei shetizakeh haguf la'asad lavam. The neshama itself it's all relative. The neshama that came into the human body at birth was perfect. But remember, we said the wattage was reduced from 100 to 70 or 80, whatever you want. Because the neshama cannot come into the guf with a full bang, because if it came in with its full 100 watts, it would convert the body into neshama. There would be no bechira, there would be no yetzer hara. Boom, there would be no perfecting the perfectly imperfect, because everything would be perfect from birth. So therefore, the Rebbeinu Shalom said, like he said to the moon, as we explained the last few days. But now, when the neshama is in the guf, it is, while it's in the guf, as we'll see, it's gaining more perfection, but certainly la'asad lavo in the future, when the neshama, after its rest and rejuvenation in the Olam HaNeshamos, in Gan Eden, after the body and soul separate, the soul, the neshama goes to Gan Eden, all neshamas. There the neshama can again rejuvenate, it can recharge itself to the full 100 watts. On top of that, in Gan Eden, it now accomplished so much with that body. Before it went into the body, it didn't learn Torah, it didn't do mitzvahs. Now it's in the neshama in Gan Eden that can go from its 80 watts back to its 100 watts, and not only back to its original 100 watts. There's additional wattage, because while it was in the body, it did Torah, it did mitzvahs, and now it may go up to 120 watts. That rejuvenated, empowered neshama is going to go into the body at Chias HaMesim, which released the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra poison into the ground, and you're now going to have a rejuvenated 120 watt neshama going into this cleansed body. Boom! And yes, it will be on a level of perfection that can enter Olam Haba. Kvar ba'olam hazeh yesh zichuch mesuyim al yidei Torah mitzvahs. Friedlander summarizing here, even in Olam Hazeh, there's a certain amount of purification of the body that can take place through Torah and mitzvahs, and that Torah and mitzvahs will give further light and wattage to the neshama as it rests in the Olam HaNeshamas. And now I'm going to explain to you the benefit that the neshama has when it perfects the guf. As it goes up from one level to another level to another level, as the neshama can go up. The neshama gains more power and more prestige. It becomes more precious. Not only in Olam Hatchia at Chias HaMesim, even while the neshama was in the body in this world, it also increases its wattage. It went into the body at 80. It was originally 100 watts. To go into the body, it had to be reduced to 60 or 70 watts. You can't increase that wattage because of the Torah mitzvahs it does. So by the time the neshama is going to go back to Gan Eden, what's going to happen? It was really 100-watt neshama. It went into the body as 60. So it was taken, the Rosh Hashanah took 40 watts away from this neshama so that it can work in the guf, but yet not take the guf and destroy Bechira. So there's 60 watts neshama in the guf, 40 watts are saved up in Gan Eden, and now the neshama and the guf elevate themselves. The neshama elevates himself through Torah mitzvahs to 80 watts. After death, this 80-watt neshama goes back to Gan Eden. It started at 60 when it was born, when the person was born. The neshama went in at 60. And it really should be 100, but 40 was left in the Gan Eden. At the time of death, the neshama went from 60 to 80 because of Torah mitzvahs. Now the neshama is going back into Gan Eden. What's waiting for it in Gan Eden? The 40 that are left behind. But now it's not 60 and 40, now it's 80 and 40. That neshama now is 120 watts. It gained perfection and it gained wattage and it gained light while it was even in the body in Olam Hazeh. Ki ein adam nishmas adam she'asek b'torah v'mitzvahs v'sigi yediyah b'kavod koina l'neshama chaser mikol eila. Because you cannot compare the neshama that learned Torah and performed mitzvahs in Olam Hazeh to what that neshama can become, to a neshama that didn't accomplish that much during its time in Olam Hazeh. Aval, however, ein iluya magia shetucha l'shanes haguf, she is ikucha nir le'nayim, kimat b'masei mispar, asridam asher bocha Hashem bam, k'moishe rabbeinu olav hashalom, Chanach ve'Eliyahu, ach zulosam afal pi shiagir lo yisro mimaseo, lo yagir kol kach shiroa gam beguf. Avoliyim natoy mit olav losad lova ishkafi malolo. But nevertheless, even though the neshama in our example came into the body at 60, it left 40 in Gan Eden, and it lifted itself up through Torah mitzvahs through to 80. Nevertheless, the density and the darkness of the guf does not allow the neshama to shine through. We're dealing with a neshama that's 80, and it's not going to be able to shine through the guf, except in very few exceptions. And one of the exceptions is Moshe Rabbeinu that we already learned about. The Ramchal gave his example. It says in the Torah, Koran Ar Pnei Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu had a shine in his face. That doesn't mean that he had beautiful skin. It doesn't mean he had a beautiful complexion. It means that the wattage inside Moshe Rabbeinu's neshama was able to come through his skin and shine so that other people were able to see the light, to the point that Moshe Rabbeinu wore a handkerchief. Pashas Kisisa described when he wore the handkerchief, when he wore didn't wear the handkerchief. It's discussed in Pashas Kisisa. But the light shone through his face. That's the light of his neshama that came through his face. And this can't be accomplished by any human being in his lifetime, except for these few exceptions. Chanoch and Eliyahu went up. Can you please stop, Mrs. Schiffman? Can you please stop writing in the chat? It is very disturbing right now. Kim b'misei mispar hasridim asher bocha Hashem bam k'Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom Chanoch ve'Eliyahu ach zulosam. However, other people cannot do this. Doesn't make a difference how long they live. That cannot get it done. Adam Marishan lived 930 years. He couldn't get it done. Even though the neshama can gain some wattage, when it goes back to the Olam HaNeshamos, it will have that additional wattage. That additional wattage is going to pay off at the resurrection of the dead at Chiyas HaMesim, so that now the neshama is going to be 120 watts. Going to go into the guf that has no Eitz Hadas Tov V'Ra, and boom, you're going to have perfection. That goal has been accomplished. The system goal has been accomplished, perfecting the perfectly imperfect. It's been perfected now, and now the neshama and the guf can go into Olam Haba. Ayin Gimel, paragraph 73. Omer HaNeshama, the neshama said, Kabetz haklal mikol masha amarta. Can you now put together in one big summary everything that we just have done? Ayin Dalet. Omer HaSeichel, so the Seichel says, Zeh haklal, this is the rule. Haguf, the body, v'osay chashucha ubalas esronos. By its very inherent creation, it's dark and imperfect. V'yesh lo zichuch al yedei haneshama. It can be purified and perfected through the neshama. 1. 2. Haneshama makayra gadol. The neshama comes from a much higher place. The body comes from the dust of the earth. It's dense and dark. The neshama is a chelel elokimi ma, whatever that means. It comes from a place above, and it comes as a spiritual ruchnius item. Avo mima'etes atzma b'bo b'guf. However, the neshama is required by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to reduce its wattage, its light, and its strength to go into the body. Why does it have to reduce the strength? Shalosar below hazichuk b'basachas. Because if it came in with the full wattage into the body, it would immediately perfect it, and it would change what the body is. It would no longer be dense dark. It would be like a neshama. And therefore, you have no system of the perfectly imperfect getting perfected. So the neshama can't come in that way to the body. But with the reduced wattage, slowly the neshama can help perfect the body. And then the neshama can go higher and higher and higher depending upon the Torah and mitzvahs it did in this lifetime, and then it can perfect the body itself at Chiyas HaMesim until the two of them can actually live together in a marvelous shidduch, instead of the shidduch of guf and neshama in Olam Hazeh, where there's this constant battle between what each of them want. They both walk into Olam Haba with a wonderful shidduch. They're both perfect now. Ata tzrichem ata anul hashem amar haneshama at shiroi lamadim al yachtav. End of paragraph 74. Lachsas b'nom Hashem lovaka bechol ad lo me'olam. Interesting that we just finished this today. Everything's min hashemayim. Tonight we're told Shalom. Tomorrow night we begin saying L'David Hashem Ori V'Yishi, and this is a pasuk from L'David Hashem Ori V'Yishi. Lachsas b'noyim Hashem lovaka bechol. The guf and the neshama will be able to visit, so to speak, in God's domain and enjoy the pleasantness of the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Zif Hashpina. Ayin Hey, paragraph 75. Amar HaNeshama, the neshama said, I now understand what I need to understand about the resurrection of the dead and the reward in the future. Now we need to go back, please, to those original questions that we had. Remember, there were several questions. Man's existence. What are the ramifications of man's acts during his life? And what is the Tchiyas HaMesim? What happens at the end of this process? The Ramchal, because of the logic we discussed, went to the end of the process, the Tachlis, which is Tchiyas HaMesim. He then explained to us what the purpose of Tchiyas HaMesim is, so the Guf and the Neshama can come together in a perfected state. But now we have to go back to the other two questions. Man's very existence while he's in this world, and the ramifications of his actions. So in footnote 144, Friedlander explains where we're up to. The Siman Samach Beis, earlier in paragraph 62, Yo'et L'daber al Metzias Ha'adam al Maisa v'al Maisa. The Seichel said that we're going to talk about man's existence and the deeds and the ramifications of his deeds. Tchila hiktim levar in tchiyas hamesim b'cholei b'ashehu primasa. So Ramchal went to the last question, which is what are the ramifications, what's the fruit of man's labor. And the fruit of man's labor is the Tchias HaMesim that we've just discussed. So we'll finish that subject now. We need now to go back to the first two. Now we have to finish understanding and explaining man's existence, u'maisav, and man's deeds, bismanim hashonim b'madrigosef hashonos, during different times of the world and different times of man, sheyotzrem u'machinim es haschasha bisman atchiyah, which are the preparatory stages for Tchias HaMesim. We went to the end because that's the tachlis. That's where we want to get to Tchias HaMesim. We explained that. We explained the Olam HaNeshamas. We explained that the very tachlis, the purpose of the Neshama coming into the Guf is to perfect the Guf. That's the whole purpose of the system. The Torah mitzvahs are the tools that the Neshama can use to perfect the Guf. Now we're going to go back. We understand the end goal here. Now let's go back and understand man's existence and understand the man's deeds during his lifetime, during the different periods of time of the world. And page Samach Beis begins that discussion about man's existence. But before we go to that, tomorrow, we're going to read a very important footnote of Friedlander on page Samach. It is footnote bracket number 20. Bracket number 20 on page Samach is a very important footnote to understand this whole discussion about the perfection of the Neshama. The Neshama came down perfect, but yet we're perfecting it even more, as well as footnote 142 on page 61. All Yidden need Yeshuas, have Yeshuas, all Yidden need Brach, should have Brachas, all Yidden need Nechamas, should have Nechamas, all Yidden that need Yeshuas, Nechamas, or Fuas Brachas, or Baruch Shalom should send it to them. He's the only one that can send it to them. He's the only one that directs it. He directs it through the person he wants to direct it through. He sends it at the time he wants to send it and how he wants to send it, because he's the Echad, Yachid, and Miyuchad, the perfect, absolute sovereign over everything. When we think about this during the day, and we live this during the day, that's a Gilui HaYichud for ourselves. That's a way to perfect our own imperfect selves. And when we perfect our own imperfect selves, we help perfect the imperfect Bria, and we help bring Mashiach Tzidkenu to help us, B'mher Yameinu, today, Mamish, to finish the job of Gilui HaYichud and the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, so we can bring the Matzah HaShekel and bring Karbanis, B'mher Yameinu. Everybody, please be careful. Go to the places you need to go. Don't go to places you don't have to go. Take into consideration your health, your age, etc. The Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to stay healthy. It's a mitzvah in our Torah to stay healthy. There are certain things we do and certain things we shouldn't do. And everybody listen to the Hora'ot. And if you want to be machmer on the Hora'ot, you can be machmer. A lot of people are machmer on the Hora'ot. Everybody keep themselves well, in good shape and in good condition, so that the Rebbeinu Shalom can send Mashiach and we can all greet Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'mheira B'yameinu, Amen. Zayik Son. Everybody have a wonderful day.